Welcome to Way Over Our Heads. It's a podcast about weather and climate. I'm Jim Dubois. With me is climatologist Kenny Blumenfeld. Kenny, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Jim?
You know, I'm doing well. We're saying goodbye to November and entering December, and we're starting December with a potential winter storm, at least for parts of the area.
Are we saying goodbye to November? Is it a teary goodbye?
Well, it's a teary goodbye because I thought it was an unusually cloudy, dark month. I never expect much out of November because I think it is the cloudiest month of the year. But this one seemed even cloudier than normal.
I'm going to throw in boring, too.
Just wasn't much going on.
I mean, boring is kind of good for human safety and good for health. But, man, for those of us who really like to sit on the edges of the seats, and we really like to just, watch something cool happen on the radar or something interesting show up on the charts and then watch out the window and go play in it when it actually happens. This month did not deliver. So good riddance, November.
It was disappointing, yeah.
Don't let the door hit you in the tuchus on the way out.
Well, we're starting out December with maybe a little bit of excitement. We'll see how excited you are about it, Kenny. But we do have, from the National Weather Service, for the Twin Cities area and surrounding area, winter weather advisory that goes into effect noon on Saturday, December 1st to noon on Sunday, December 2nd. They're talking about accumulating snow and the wintry mix. I like we talked about different precipitation types last week. So we're going to get a little sample of that, it sounds like. Maybe no snert, though.
I don't know if there'll be snert. I mean, once it's on the ground, it's going to become disgusting within a matter of, especially on the roads. It's going to turn brown and get kind of gross. And I don't know if there's a word for that sort of dirty slush.
Right.
But, so if winter weather advisory means this, it means that when it's happening, you're going to go, whoa, it's snowing, or whoa, it's slushing, or whoa, it's sleeting, and it'll get your attention while you're driving. But winter weather advisory means that in a month, you'll have forgotten about it. Maybe even in 2 weeks, you'll have forgotten about it. And if I can predict anything, it's that the majority of listeners, except for those who, hopefully this doesn't happen, except for those who slide off the road or get in an accident, they are going to forget this weather system. That's what a winter weather advisory tells you. Now, a winter storm warning,
which we do have for parts of Minnesota south of the Twin Cities.
Yeah, so that means you might remember it if you're the kind of person who remembers weather events.
We're going to talk more about that, too.
Yeah, blizzard warning means, this is one to pay attention to. We don't have any of those. But yeah, it's a fairly energetic weather system. It's got a nice slug of moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. It's on a trajectory. So the low pressure system that's forcing this weather to occur that is going to move from the panhandles of Texas and Oklahoma.
Is that the infamous Panhandle Hooker?
Yeah, that's a terrible name. Yeah, the Panhandle Hooker. Oy vey. The Panhandle Hooker is named that because for a long time, meteorologists really struggled against just the whole notion of creativity. And the storm literally takes a hooking trajectory out of the Panhandle region. So, you put two and two together and you've got the Panhandle Hooker. But I'm just going to say that's not what comes to most people's mind when you use that term. But that storm type is kind of a notorious major winter weather producer. A lot of our heaviest snowstorms come from these, hooking panhandle type low pressure systems. So, seeing one that's going to squeeze out 4 or 5, maybe 6 inches of snow at best, and, maybe in southwestern Minnesota where those winter storm warnings are, maybe we'll see a little bit more, maybe more like 8 or 9 inches. But that's really on the low end of what you can expect from this kind of weather system. We've seen some of our biggest snowstorms in history have been this type, and they can produce up to a foot or even 2 feet of snow when all the right things come together. So this one, the bottom line is, the weather's going to be tough if you're traveling Saturday and Saturday night. It's going to be windy, slushy, snowy. We might have some of that mixed precipitation, meaning there could be sleet or rain mixed in with the snow. But this isn't going to be one that people tell their grandkids about.
So you think this is kind of an underachiever in a way?
Yeah. I think, now that we're setting the expectations so low, it's going to be hard for it to underachieve. And, for all I know, I'll be wrong. But I think that, this is sort of a C student in the class of winter storms. For all winter weather events, I guess it's probably a B student because it's good enough that it can prompt some advisories and some warnings. But once you get into the class of weather systems that actually prompt advisories and warnings from the National Weather Service, this is sort of the bottom of the class. Who knows what'll come of this thing? Its parents aren't very proud of it. They don't like telling their friends what it's up to.
Well, this may not be etched then in many of our memories if things go the way you believe they're going to go.
Yeah.
But it's interesting in Minnesota how we seem to let major weather events that are so important at the moment that maybe command a lot of attention and maybe are talked about for several years after they occur, but we kind of let them fade from memory after a while. And I think even the Armistice Day blizzard, and part of that is understandable because we're talking an event that happened over 70 years ago. Many of the people who experienced it, maybe even a majority of them, are no longer with us. Right. And, talking about the 1965 May 6 tornadoes in the Twin Cities, again, 50 plus years ago.
Well, we love talking about this stuff.
We do.
And some of us like imagining it too. But
right.
I think that, as much as people do like talking about the weather here, it's kind of seems to be confined to themselves.
Right.
Tell me a story about me. If I'm in it, I like it and I remember it. If it happened to me, I care. But the farther it is from me, the less I care. It seems to be the kind of pervasive attitude. And we also get a lot of weather. So it seems exciting when it's happening, right? I mean...
Well, does that frustrate scientists like yourself or researchers? Because thinking about the May 6, 1965 tornadoes, you've done research and we know a lot of the areas that were hit by the tornadoes, particularly in the Southwest Metro, the Chanhassen area, the area by Norwood Young America, not very populous at that time. Now a lot more people living there, a lot more people potentially in harm's way
Fridley too.
if a similar system were to manifest itself. Does it bother you that should we be more top of mind on those and think, hey, it could happen again and it could be a lot worse this time?
Yeah, I mean, I've poured a lot of energy into that notion professionally and even in just personally. I've done a lot of outreach for free with nobody paying me just to try and help people get that in their minds. But one of the things I've learned, and this is a deeper social science issue, is that, you can stress it and while you're giving the talk and showing the cool graphs and giving the presentation and even showing the rapid fire pictures of tornadoes moving right into downtown areas, people will forget.
Right.
For whatever reason. I mean, we have a lot going on in our lives. And so it's frustrating, but it's also, I think, a reality. And it's something that people in emergency management have to worry about all the time because there's a number of hazards, not just weather-related hazards, that it would be great if everybody had situational awareness to make quick decisions and have a good understanding of all of the risks. But most of us kind of focus on whatever's immediate. I like the term. It's a big word. We're very myopic. We tend to be nearsighted or short-sighted even, because what's right in front of us is what matters most, it seems. And that sometimes makes it hard for us to react when the situation changes quickly.
Well, we're going to talk about some memorable weather events in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota coming up on our next podcast. But let's move on here, kind of staying with the same topic, about our obsession in Minnesota, our fascination with the weather. It seems like, I can't recall who coined this term, but whoever it was called Minnesota the theater of seasons because of the vast variety of weather. Why is there so much variety to our weather,
I
Kenny?
believe I'm going to attribute that quotation to Mr. Paul Douglas.
Oh,
I believe,
interesting, yes.
I believe he used that term in his first book, Prairie Skies.
Ah, okay.
He also called it the Super Bowl of weather. But now maybe he was quoting someone else, but I'm going to at least pass it on to Mr. Douglas. So we love our weather too, right? And we talk about it here. So it's part of the social fabric. Now, not everybody loves every part of the weather, but It is a common conversation piece. And, depending on who you ask, you could ask someone who's maybe more focused on people working outside. And they say, well, we've had to live with the weather and we've had to work around it. And it's the backdrop for all the farming and all of the work that we've done. And that's, I think, a reality that people who in the discipline of geography would be really happy to hear us acknowledge, that, some of the natural environmental factors actually shape how we live, and then that shapes how we think and how we see the world to an extent. There are major limitations to that. But other people could say, maybe it has to do with who settled this region and how they sort of think about things and what they value. And it could also just be the fact that Minnesota has some of the most variable weather in the world. I mean, there are places we could have a contest and we wouldn't win. There are parts of the United States that have greater temperature swings than Minnesota. There are parts of the United States that also have blizzards, and maybe the blizzards are worse, and also have tornadoes, and maybe the tornadoes tend to be either more numerous or worse. But we do get it all in a way that not very many other places on the planet do. And I think that's what drives our obsession. There's always something to talk about. I mean, as a professional climatologist, one of the things that is so exciting to us working in Minnesota is there's always something new going on. And even if the weather turns boring, it might be breaking a record for how boring or dreary or dull it is. So whether it's raininess, drought, snowstorms, late ice on the lakes, an insanely early heat wave, these are all kind of, year-to-year realities in Minnesota. Severe weather, blizzards in the wrong month. I mean, these are all things that happen. So, there's a geographical explanation for it too.
Right. Well, that's an interesting point, Kenny. And of course, this is an agricultural state and weather is critical to agriculture. You bring up another interesting point about the folks who immigrated to the United States from other parts of the world. And of course, Native Americans were very familiar with the weather here in Minnesota. But somebody coming from, say, Sweden, Norway, comes to Minnesota and these tornado things, that's not something they're used to. At least it doesn't happen very often in that part of the world. And then I think on a more contemporary basis, we have obviously a large Hmong population in Minnesota. We have people from East Africa here. And if I'm not mistaken, in the Hmong language, there's no word for tornado because it's not part of their experience. So you really don't think about this, but for people who come to this part of the country, they're experiencing weather for the first time that is unknown to them.
Yeah, and what do the civil defense sirens mean if you're new and you don't have that context? Oh, we're really testing on a monthly basis to make sure our system works because there are often tornadoes and we need to go down to the basement. I'm not sure if that's information that's handed out when you first come to this country. Wait, let me restate that. That's not information that's handed out when you first come to this country. There's not sort of a tip card of, well, here's some things about the weather that you'll really need to know when you get to Minnesota. And that makes sense because obviously people coming here often have more pressing concerns, but it does create some complications too, in trying to sort out all the messages. But yeah, it's, and there's a lot. I had a student who was from the Middle East, and his first winter, he had never experienced temperatures below freezing where he was from. And his first winter was a pretty good winter. It was the winter of 2010-11. So there was a lot of snow. There was some
quite an initiation for him.
It was a good initiation.
Yes.
I mean, I think anyone would acknowledge, and we'll talk about this until, the listeners feel like vomiting, but the, winter isn't what it used to be in terms of cold, but we still get cold, and it's still cold enough to harm you. It's just not the same level of cold that it used to be. But from an initiation standpoint, it was pretty jarring because we were 10, 15 below zero multiple times that winter. And the winds were blowing for some of those days. And there were 2.5 feet of snow on the ground. I mean, that was something, it was all brand new. And by May, we had a major tornado outbreak that included the city of Minneapolis. So this student had seen, multiple weather events that just, in his world prior to coming here, those things didn't exist. And now they seem like realities.
So I would imagine for someone like yourself who is also involved in public safety, emergency management, the warning systems, that it must be challenging to reach people who are coming to the U.S., who are not familiar with the variety of weather here, and that lack of familiarity could be potentially very hazardous to them. Even understanding the need to dress warmly or worry about something called a wind chill or, factors like that, or having the proverbial emergency kit in your car. Those things are something that I think a lot of people don't quite appreciate, that there are people now in Minnesota for whom this weather stuff is all new.
So I can't necessarily speak to all of the progress that's been made. I mean, I know the Minnesota Department of Public Safety and a lot of the emergency management organizations have made a lot of progress. And there are community liaisons who exist for many newcomers to at least help funnel some of that information towards them. There are resources and communications that I'm not equipped to talk about, but that have sort of helped bridge some of those gaps. But I think it's still safe to say that, maybe I don't want to call it a looming nightmare, but something that we don't like to imagine is what happens if we get a really nasty weather event in an area that has one or more of these vulnerable populations. And it's not just people who aren't familiar with the sort of climatological customs of the area, but it's also people of, lesser mobility or lesser resources or poor access to information. And I would say that that's not something that's easy to address. Professionally, I think it makes all of us a little bit uncomfortable and uneasy because we know there are these very hard to bridge gaps in the system that just, as much as you try and include people, that you fill one gap and another one pops open. I would say we've made a lot of progress in the last couple decades of growing awareness and developing programs that fill some of those gaps in. But yeah, you get a really big, high-impact weather event of the type that we really haven't had. You think of the 1965 tornadoes. It's been a while since we had something like that. It's been since then, since we had something like that. And, that was utter chaos. And I think even people who are accustomed to our climate don't necessarily know what they'll do in that situation. So then just add on a layer of people who either don't have cars or don't have the right communications or don't have access to information or adequate shelter or don't have the ability to get to the adequate shelter. It's a scary thought. And, you can feel good about a lot of the progress we've made, but that idea still looms for sure.
Well, Kenny, next time we'll talk about some of those memorable Minnesota weather events, and we have a number of them to discuss.
Yeah, I think to tee it off, too, we should talk about why it is that our weather is so it's not just that we have tornadoes and blizzards and heat waves and cold outbreaks, but there's a reason for that, too. And I think we could sort of dive into, the 5 reasons that Minnesota's weather is so great and then follow that up with 5 great weather events that basically were the result of those reasons.
Excellent, Kenny. I'm looking forward to this next time.
I'm kind of excited about that, too. All right.
Absolutely. And then we can also evaluate whether or not this snowstorm is the underachiever that it seems to be.
Oh, yeah. If we start doing forecast validation, we're going to be shut down pretty quickly. We're going to be shut down real quickly.
maybe we'll stay away from that.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been Way Over Our Heads. I'm Jim Dubois. Kenny Blumenfeld is with me. Kenny, we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Yeah, thanks. Looking forward to it, Jim.